The champagne bubbles in my glass caught the fluorescent light like tiny trapped stars, each one rising desperately toward the surface before vanishing into nothing. I stood near the makeshift bar in the conference room, watching my colleagues pretend this corporate holiday party wasn't the annual exercise in forced cheer we all knew it was. "Another scotch, Nate?" The bartender, clearly hired for the evening, gestured toward my empty glass with professional enthusiasm. "Make it a double," I replied, my voice carrying that particular brand of exhaustion that comes from watching grown adults network over shrimp cocktail and small talk about quarterly projections. The room buzzed with the kind of conversation that happens when people who barely tolerate each other during business hours suddenly have to socialize. Marketing executives clustered near the windows, their laughter sharp and calculated. The IT department huddled by the cheese table like refugees from a more interesting party. And somewhere in this sea of forced merriment was my wife, Hazel, working the room with the precision of a political candidate. I found her near the presentation screen, animated and glowing in that way she gets when she's the center of attention. Her red dress caught every eye in the room, and she knew it. Hazel had always possessed an almost supernatural ability to command a space, to make everyone else feel like supporting characters in her personal drama. "Ladies and gentlemen," she called out, tapping her champagne flute with a fork. The sound cut through the chatter like a blade. "Could I have everyone's attention for just a moment?" The room gradually quieted, conversations trailing off as heads turned toward her. "I think we might have some things to discuss." She pressed the card into my hand, her fingers cold against mine. "Things to discuss?" I asked, but she was already stepping away. "Call me tomorrow," she said quietly, her eyes moving briefly toward where Wes stood talking to someone from finance. "Trust me, it's important." And with that, she walked away, leaving me standing there with her business card and a growing sense that the evening's surprises were far from over. The bar Mina had suggested was the kind of place that existed in the shadow of corporate districts. Dark wood, dim lighting, and the sort of anonymity that made it perfect for conversations people didn't want overheard. I arrived 15 minutes early and claimed a corner booth, nursing a whiskey and trying to make sense of the previous night's events. Hazel had been unusually quiet on the drive home from the party, responding to my questions about her pregnancy timeline with vague answers and tired smiles. She'd gone to bed early, claiming exhaustion, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a growing list of questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. "Thank you for coming," Mina said, sliding into the booth across from me. She'd traded her party dress for a sharp business suit, looking every inch the corporate attorney she was. But there was something different about her demeanor, a barely contained energy that suggested she was operating on very little sleep and a lot of caffeine. "Your text said it was urgent," I replied, studying her face. "Something about mutual interests?" She signaled the bartender for a wine and leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice even though the nearest occupied table was 20 feet away. The private investigator had delivered photographs, audio recordings, and financial documents that painted a picture of deception so thorough it was almost artistic in its scope. But it was the conversation I overheard between Hazel and Jade that finally pushed me over the edge. I'd come home early from work, claiming a headache, and found Hazel on the phone in our bedroom. The door was partially closed, but her voice carried clearly down the hallway. "The timing worked out perfectly," she was saying, her tone casual and satisfied. 6 weeks along puts conception right in the middle of that conference weekend in Chicago. I pressed myself against the wall, activating the recording app on my phone. "I know it's risky," Hazel continued, "but Nate's so trusting. He believes everything I tell him about the fertility issues and the IVF consultations. He actually researched financing options for treatments we'll never need." There was a pause while Jade responded, then Hazel laughed. It was a sound I'd heard 1,000 times before, but now it felt like ice water in my veins. "Of course Wes is nervous. He's got more to lose than I do. But that's exactly why this works. He can't afford to let me struggle as a single mother, not when everyone knows he's the father." Another pause. "The divorce will be clean. Irreconcilable differences, no fault, no drama. Nate's too nice to fight dirty, and by the time he figures out the timeline, it'll be too late to matter." Her voice dropped slightly. Besides, what's he going to do? Demand a paternity test? That would just make him look paranoid and controlling. I stood in the hallway, listening to my wife plan the destruction of our marriage with the same casual efficiency she brought to marketing campaigns. Every word was another nail in the coffin of whatever love I'd once felt for her. "Jade, you've been amazing through all this," Hazel continued. "I know the hotel bookings and the alibis were a lot of work, but the promotion Wes arranged makes it worthwhile, right?" That evening, I met Mina at yet another discreet location, a wine bar in a part of town where we were unlikely to encounter anyone from either of our social circles. She listened to the recording with the focused attention of someone building a legal case. "That's it," she said when the audio finished. "That's everything we need to prove intent and planning. She just confessed to deliberately deceiving you about paternity, fertility issues, and her plans for divorce." So what now? Now, we start phase 2. She pulled out a timeline she'd been working on. Wes has a board meeting next Friday where they're announcing quarterly results and discussing executive bonuses. I'm going to make sure the board knows exactly what kind of man they're rewarding. How? Anonymous tip to the company ethics hotline, backed up by documentation of his affair and misuse of corporate resources. Hotel charges, restaurant bills, all of it paid for with company money. Her smile was sharp. Companies don't like executives who create liability issues. And what about Hazel? Leave Hazel to me. I have something special planned for her. The something special turned out to be a baby shower. You're going to throw my wife a baby shower? I'm going to throw your wife the baby shower of the century. Every woman from both our social circles, all the wives from Wes's company, everyone who matters in our little community. Mina's eyes gleamed with anticipation. And at the height of the celebration, when everyone's gathered around admiring the gifts and congratulating the happy mother-to-be, I'm going to hand out copies of the paternity timeline. That's brilliant? Devastating? Perfectly legal? She shrugged. Sometimes the best revenge is just telling the truth at exactly the right moment. We spent the next hour planning the details. Mina would organize the shower, using her connections to ensure maximum attendance. I would continue gathering evidence and documenting Hazel's lies. And when the moment was right, we would expose everything. "There's one more thing," Mina said as we prepared to leave. "I want you to be there, at the shower." Men don't usually attend baby showers. This one will be different. I'm calling it a couple celebration to honor both parents. Wes will be there too, along with all the other husbands. She gathered her papers with satisfaction. I want them both to watch their world collapse in real time. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Hazel was thrilled about the shower, interpreting Mina's invitation as a sign of acceptance into the upper echelons of corporate society. She spent hours planning her outfit and practicing her grateful mother-to-be speech. "Mina Corin is throwing me a baby shower," she told her mother during one of their daily phone calls. "Can you believe it? She barely knows me, but I guess she was just so moved by our announcement at the party." I listened to these conversations with a mixture of amazement and disgust. Even now, with everything I knew about her deception, Hazel continued to lie effortlessly. She'd created an entire fictional narrative about our fertility struggles, complete with doctor visits and treatment plans that existed only in her imagination. But the most revealing moment came when she was talking to Jade about the shower guest list. "Everyone's going to be there," Hazel said, her voice bright with excitement. "All the executive wives, the whole marketing team, even some people from Wes's department. It's going to be perfect." "Are you nervous?" Jade asked. "Why would I be nervous? It's just a baby shower." But I could hear the uncertainty creeping into her voice. "Although I do hope Wes can keep his composure. He's been so strange lately, ever since the announcement." "Maybe he's just adjusting to the idea." "Maybe." Hazel was quiet for a moment. "Jade, we've been careful, haven't we, about the timeline, the story, all of it?" "Of course we have. Everything's documented exactly the way we planned. Hotel receipts from your work conferences, restaurant bills from client dinners, everything supports your schedule." And Nate hasn't suspected anything? Nate's clueless. He's so focused on being supportive and preparing for fatherhood, he's not asking any difficult questions. I smiled grimly as I listened to them congratulate each other on their deception. They thought they were so clever, so far ahead of everyone else. They had no idea that their carefully constructed lies were about to become evidence in their own destruction. The shower was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at Mina's house. She'd invited 43 people, including every significant figure in our combined social and professional circles. The guest list read like a who's who of people whose opinions mattered in our community. 43 people were staring at documented proof of his affair, his deception, and his role in what was clearly a calculated betrayal. "This is ridiculous," Hazel said, but her voice lacked conviction. "These documents are fake or taken out of context or, I said, speaking for the first time since the revelation began, "just like the recording I made of you and Jade discussing your plans." I pulled out my phone and played the audio of Hazel's conversation, her own voice filling the silent room with confessions of deception and calculated manipulation. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Patricia Morrison stood up, gathering her purse with deliberate precision. "I think we've seen enough," she said coldly. "Thank you for the enlightening afternoon, Mina." One by one, the guests began to leave, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust to barely concealed satisfaction at witnessing such spectacular social destruction. Some paused to murmur sympathies to Mina and me, others simply fled the scene as quickly as possible. Within 30 minutes, the only people left in the room were Mina, Wes, Hazel, Jade, and me. "You planned this," Hazel said, her voice shaking with rage and humiliation. "Both of you. This was all planned." "Just like your pregnancy," Mina replied calmly. "The only difference is that our plan was designed to reveal the truth while yours was designed to hide it." Wes finally found his voice. "Mina, we can discuss this privately. There's no need for what? For honesty? For consequences?" She turned to face him fully. "You used company resources to conduct an affair, you conspired to deceive multiple people about paternity, and you participated in a scheme to defraud my friend Nate of his trust and his future." "It wasn't like that," Jade said desperately. "We never meant for anyone to get hurt." "You never meant to get caught," I corrected. "There's a difference." Hazel looked around the room, seeing her carefully constructed world crumbling in real time. "This isn't over," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You think you've won something here, but this isn't over." "Actually," Mina said, pulling out one final document, "it is. Wes, you'll find your termination paperwork in your email. Effective immediately for violation of company ethics policies and misuse of corporate resources." "You can't do that." "I already did. The board met this morning after reviewing the evidence. Your severance package has been voided due to the morality clause in your contract." She turned to Hazel, "And you'll find that Nate has already filed for divorce. No fault, citing irreconcilable differences. Very clean, very simple." "The baby," Hazel started. "Will have a father," I said, "just not me. Paternity tests are wonderful things, aren't they? Very precise, very accurate." Hazel stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the exact instant when she realized that her careful plans had not just failed, but had been turned against her with devastating effectiveness. "I underestimated you," she said finally. "Yes," I replied, "you did." And with that, she walked out of the room, out of the house, and out of my life. The cleanup took another hour. Mina and I worked in comfortable silence, packing up decorations and throwing away the remnants of what had been planned as a celebration but had become something else entirely. "How do you feel?" she asked as we finished. "Empty," I said, surprised by my own honesty, but also relieved, like I can finally breathe again. "The legal proceedings will take a few months. Divorce, custody arrangements, financial settlements. And then? And then we move on with our lives, separately, but with the satisfaction of knowing that justice was served." I looked around Mina's living room, now returned to its normal, elegant state, with no trace of the afternoon's drama. In a few hours, the story would be spreading through our social and professional networks. By Monday, everyone would know the truth about Hazel's pregnancy, Wes's affair, and the spectacular way their deception had been exposed. "Thank you," I said to Mina as I prepared to leave. "Thank you," she replied. "I couldn't have done this alone." I drove home through the quiet suburban streets, past houses where normal families were living normal lives, unaware of the small war that had just concluded in their neighborhood. My house felt different when I entered it, larger somehow, but also more mine than it had been in months. There was a note from Hazel on the kitchen counter. "I'll be back for my things tomorrow. We'll need to talk about arrangements." I crumpled up the note and threw it away. There would be lawyers for arrangements. There would be courts for custody. There would be legal proceedings for everything else. But there would be no more lies, no more deception, and no more pretending that our marriage had been anything other than a carefully constructed fiction. I poured myself a drink and sat in my living room, surrounded by the remnants of a life I'd thought was real. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new complications, new realities to navigate. But tonight, for the first time in months, I was alone with the truth, and not felt like victory enough.